Hello juniors, and welcome back to Computer Systems and Programming. For this video, we're going to be going over functions and how to do them in Python. So we're going to be going over the actual syntax and how we would make these functions in Python. So the first thing we're going to do is make a project. So I already have mine, but to make one, you go File, New, PyDev Project, and you can name it Functions. Then once you have it named, you can click Finish. I have mine right here. Once you have that project, you can click File, New, PyDev Module, and you're going to name this module Practice Functions. And you can click Finish. Just make sure that your source folder is Functions, and you'll see it pop up in your Functions project folder. And you'll have your new module. So, we're going to do a couple of simple functions and then a couple of more complex ones. But there's kind of some standards with naming functions. So when you name functions, most of the time you either use, so you'll either do function underscore name. So you'll separate each letter of the, or each word of the function with an underscore. That's a common way. If you're going to do that way, you keep all of the letters lowercase. Functions can have numbers in it, so it can be like function 3, but it's not required to have a number in it. They can be any length, so you can just keep making the function as long as you want. It's just the longer you make it, the more annoying it's going to be to using that function. They just can't be the same as any Python keywords. So it can't be true or false or print. There's a lot of keywords that Python uses that you can't use. So like with or and. You can string those words together, so you can say Michael and Patrice. And so now that's a completely different thing. As you see, that's the other style of using the function. Instead of using underscores, you do it like variables and you add capital letters. It's completely up to personal preference. I like to do it that way. Other people like to use the underscores. So before writing any code, let's think about how we would solve this problem, this theoretical problem we have. We want to make a simple function that gets the sum of two numbers. So first, let's think of what's a good name for this function. It can be something like add two numbers or sum of numbers or something along that line. Then what mathematical operator are we going to use for this function? Well, we're going to need to use the plus operator or addition operator because we're going to need to add the first number to the second number. And then we're also going to need a variable that will store the sum, and we're going to need the variables that get the two numbers. Is there anything else that we're going to need to do? Well, when you think about it, we'll also need to somehow bring that sum back to whatever the user is doing. Because if we're calling that function, we need to bring it back to the user so we can use the return statement. So let's actually program this theoretical function. At the start of any function, you do define, and then so you can do sum two numbers. So you see the Python is going to have this bright, your text might be different, but mine turns to yellow for function. And then we're going to have two parameters. We're going to have number 1 and number 2. Then, now that we're tabbed in once inside of this function, we're inside of the function, we're going to say sum of nums equals num1 plus num2. Then, this is doing the addition of those two things. Then we can return sum of nums. So now if we're down here, we can call this function sum to numbers, and we can input whatever numbers we want. 4, and 5. And then we can store this in a variable. So we can say x equals sum two numbers 4 and 5. If we run this and we print out x, boop, run as Python run, you'll see it prints out 9 because it calls this function, it goes into this function, and it replaces num1 with 4 and num2 with 5, and then it adds 4 and 5, which equals 9, and stores it in sum of nums. Then it returns sum of nums to this spot. So it replaces this with sum of nums, which is 9. So then it makes x equal 9. Then we print out x. So now we can keep doing this with a bunch of different numbers. So if we repeat this, let's just copy this whole thing. What if I want to know the sum of that number just plus that number? Well, you may not be able to do that off the top of your head, but I run this function, boom, does it right there. So this would be a handy function if you're doing a lot of addition and you're just adding numbers together. Let's say though we wanted to add another number. We wanted to be able to add 3 numbers together. Well, let's just add another parameter. Now we have num3, and we can just add num3 down here as well. That means we're going to have to add another parameter to both of these, because if we run these right now, let's try running it, it's going to throw an error because it says missing one of the positional arguments. It's missing num3. This didn't give it enough parameters because it's looking for 3 parameters and it only got 2. So all we have to do is add another number on there. And again, you probably can't do this math in your head very quickly, but you run the program and it has the answers right there. So let's go through a more complicated function that we can do. So let's say we wanted to calculate tax, because tax is a common thing that you have to deal with at stores. So let's define a tax function, and we can give it 2 variables. We're going to give it the subtotal. That's the total amount of your groceries without the tax on it. And then you can say the percent tax or tax in your state. So this is a more complicated formula than just adding 2 numbers. But first we have to calculate what is the actual tax amount, like how much money is the tax. So we'll take subtotal times the percent of tax. Whoops. So actually, let's change this to tax calc just so that we don't have 2 things that are both called tax. But so now tax amount is going to be the amount of money that you owe in taxes because it's the percent of the subtotal. Then, to find the total, all you do is add subtotal to the tax amount, or you add the tax amount to subtotal. Then you can return the total. So now we can calculate the tax for any state and any amount. So we can say tax calc, and what's our subtotal? Let's say that $152 is what we spent. And let's say our tax is 0.05, which would be 5%, because remember we're in decimals and you can convert it. Now, if I print, first we have to store this. Let's store this variable. Let's store it in y, and then let's print y. So now when we run this, it'll give us our new subtotal of 159.60. So this nifty little program then calculates our tax. So let's say you're writing a program for a business to calculate the tax amounts and shipping and such, then you can do that. So let's say we wanted to make this a little bit more complicated, and it will account for shipping. So we can add to this function. We can say if the total is more than 100, we can say shipping equals 0. And let's just make this variable up here as well. So we'll make shipping equals 0, but then we'll say if the total is above 100, it'll be free shipping. Else if the total is above 50, then we'll make shipping equal $10. And then for all other orders, we'll just make the shipping equal $5. Then all we have to do is do total equals total plus shipping. Because shipping starts as 0, but depending on what the how much money they're spending, it'll add on to it. So if we test this out, let's test this out with, so this is the first one is a case where the total is going to be above $100. The next case will be one where it's below $100 but above $50, and then the last one will be where it's below $50 and below $100. Now if we run all of these, it'll add on those shipping costs as well. So we know it added 5 cents as well as the $5 shipping cost, and then the $10 shipping cost for the $80 subtotal. So we can make these functions with this. And could you imagine having to type this out every single time you want to count the tax? You'd have to type out these 11 lines. That'd be really annoying. So functions allow you to reuse code for different cases, for different subtotals and different tax amounts. So it's a really nice way of using that. One function that you've been using all along is the print function. You just didn't know it, but print prints of one thing. So you can put a variable, you can put string, and it'll print that one thing. That's why when you're doing this, you add, and you're adding strings together, you put the plus sign, because first you're adding these all together, making them one string, and then you're printing out that you're sending that one parameter off to the print statement. So that's how the print works. It's just another function that is inherent to Python. So you can make your own functions, or you can use the functions that we've been using all along to do our programs. So let's do one last example of another type of function. Let's make a function that will we'll just say cap, first name. So we can take the name and we just want to capitalize the first letter of it. So what we can do is we can say name at 0, that's the first letter, equals name at 0 dot upper, because we know that upper changes the name to uppercase. Then we can return name. So it replaces the first letter of name with the same letter but uppercase. Then let's try this out. We can cap first name. Let's put in my name, all lowercase Michael. Boop, boop, boop. And then let's store that in a variable z, and we can print out z. So now if we run this, it says that there's an error. So actually, this doesn't, unlike functions, you can't assign to a certain string. So instead, what we have to do is we can do the name, the first letter to uppercase plus the rest of the letters. So we can say one on. So this will handle the first letter, and then this will add all the other letters. And if we run this, there we go. Because this is 1 to end, so whatever length of name, it'll just go to the end of it. And so this handles the first letter, this handles the second, or the second and whatever letters come after that. So that's another function that's pretty simple to do once, but if you had to do that a bunch of times for a bunch of different names, it'd be very annoying. Now I can just copy paste this over and over and just put names into it. Patrice, Juan, William, and maybe I don't even want to do that. Maybe I have a list of different names that I want it to go through. So I'll do list at 1 or list at 2, and just it goes through the whole list, right? I can make a while loop that goes through the whole thing. So functions are very helpful for going through a lot of data that changes just a little bit, which is why we use them, because we can use the parameters to just change simple things like the name or the tax amounts for different orders, stuff like that. So that's the general gist of functions. You just need to define them, give a name. You don't need parameters, but you can have parameters, and you can have as many as you want. You just separate them by commas. Then you put your code tabbed in once, and you end the function with a return statement. You don't need to have a variable. You can return nothing, but most of the time you're going to do something with the data and then return it. So you return that new data and store it in something. Additionally, you don't have to store this in a variable. You could just put this, if I go like this and put it there, it will print the return of this function. So if I show this, run it, it'll still print the right thing, and this is still technically stored in Z, but instead it's running this function, because how Python works is it runs the inside the parentheses. So it tries to run print, but then it realizes, oh, I need to run cap first name. So then it runs cap first name with Michael, does all of it does, returns it, and replaces it with this part. Then it goes back out to the print statement, tries to print that, and then successfully prints the uppercase Michael. If you need more examples of this, there's always more tutorials on YouTube going over how to use functions efficiently and how to use them in creative and new ways. After you understand functions and get a good grip on it, you're going to go onto Canvas. You can go down to the release 5, and you can start working on the drills. So you can first look at the drills activity prompt. It'll tell you how to do it. It's the same as all the other drills, and you'll do function drills.py. Then you'll go on to the debugging function drills and complete those drills. Once you complete all that, you'll submit them into the activity prompts as links to your GitHub repository. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I can help you out with completing these things. All right, juniors, I will see you later.